Hi, I'm Bess Rocklitzer, president of the David Bermant Foundation. Today we have our highly esteemed and accomplished friend, Christiane Paul, joining us for the third presentation of Color, Light, Motion, hosted and created by Victoria Vesna. Please enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Color, Light, Motion, a series of talks and discussions related to David Bermant's unique collection of kinetic art. In this episode, I am introducing Christiane Paul, who I have known for quite a while now, and our paths have crossed in many ways, starting back in 1997 when she was publishing a journal, only journal at that point, dedicated to the digital art, Intelligent Agent. We collaborated in many ways. I was in shows she curated. She curated an exhibition at the UCLA Design Media Arts. We published and edited a volume together, Context Providers, with the late Margot Lovejoy. And we were even colleagues at the New School in New York. But all along, one of the things that I admire about Christiane is that she has been such a voice in telling the established art world to take digital/media art world seriously. And as curator at the Whitney since 2001, she actually has a position to make these statements. She has always done a beautiful way of creating a trajectory, a lineage where we see that media arts doesn't just come out of the blue. And that's what she'll do in today's talk. So welcome, Christiane.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Victoria.
Sure, I'm so happy to have you here. It's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Should I start screen sharing already?
Yes, sure.
Mm-hmm. All right. Once again, thanks so much for the generous introduction and for this opportunity to engage with the Bermant collection. And I was, as Victoria mentioned, a resident in 2014, so quite some time ago. But the first time I really intersected with the Bermant Foundation and its works was in 2007, when I curated an exhibition titled Feedback together with Jemima Relly and Charlie Gear for the Laboral Art Center in Gijón in Asturias in Spain. The exhibition Feedback tried to trace lineages of today's digital art. And one of these historical lineages is art that is based on instructions or rule sets, be they natural language or actual computer code, and can be traced from early examples in crafts, such as the repetitive operations in the generative creation of patterned fabrics and tiles. As you may know, the Jacquard loom is often cited as origin of computer arts. But this instruction-based practice, of course, also surfaces in Dada, the conceptual works of artists such as Sol LeWitt or the Fluxus movement in the 1960s, and then, of course, in today's software art. And given this rule-based nature, this artistic practice is also closely related to art that explores or sets up systems reacting to outside or its own inputs. So right now you are looking at a view of the top floor of the Feedback exhibition. And on that floor, we precisely engaged with that kind of rule-based practice from works by Harold Cohen. You see Aaron projected onto the left wall. But also Casey Rios in the background. And then on the lower floor, we traced another lineage of the history of digital art, and that is the experimentation with concepts of light and moving image from early kinetic and op art to responsive notions of television and cinema. And this is where we actually borrowed works from the Bermant Foundation, and the show certainly would not have been what it is without these works. Unfortunately, this view across the lower floor doesn't give you great images of works from the Bermant Foundation. But in the middle, I just mentioned it, you see the back of Namjoon Paik's participation TV. So motion, light, and optical effects in their intersection with responsive systems are really at the core of the artworks that are brought together in the David Bermant collection. And that's what makes it so important. And once again, it was absolutely crucial to include these works in the exhibition. I will point out later which ones they were. The notions of interaction and virtuality in art were explored fairly early on in relation to objects and their optical effects. So Laszlo Moholy-Nagy early on talked about his kinetic light sculptures in the context of virtual volumes, the outline or trajectory presented by an object in motion. So this idea was present in art in the early 20th century. Of course, the technological framework wasn't quite there, so it took a while to realize that. So the notions of interaction and virtuality in art have a long, long history, and David Bermant's involvement really was twofold. He was, on the one hand, a very passionate collector of kinetic, optical, and systems art, but he also realized that these art forms largely remained marginalized from the mainstream art world and needed continuous financial support. And this support was something he really provided through the act of collecting. I'm bringing up a screen with a few more works from the feedback exhibition and beyond, just to touch upon the framework in which the Bermant Foundation's collection exists. So what you see here are two images of Robert Rauschenberg's Open Score. We showed a video of that in feedback, and also a piece by Edward Inatovitz, Sam on the left, which was included in the show. And Inatovitz also created the legendary Sensor robot, which you see in the middle. So understanding the ideas behind and intent of the works in the Bermant collection, one needs to consider them in the context of cybernetics and the 60s fascination with systems and systems aesthetics. While the systems approach in the 60s and 70s was actually really broad and addressed issues ranging from notions of the art object to social conditions, there also was this underlying experimentation with technological systems. The science of cybernetics was founded very early on by Norbert Wiener in 1948 in Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine. Wiener defined three central concepts, which he maintains were crucial in any organism or system: communication, control, and feedback. And cybernetics really laid the groundwork for drawing these parallels between organisms or the human body and the machinic and computational. So while cybernetics was founded in the late 40s, or the term was coined, it took until the 60s until it really infiltrated most of the sciences. And from the 1950s onwards, cybernetics, kineticism, and computational principles really started increasingly influencing artistic practice. So Jean Tinguely, Nicolas Schoeffer, Takis, Otto Pina, Julio Leparc, all of them are actually represented in the Bermant collection and were really influential artists in shaping these practices. And the 50s and 60s also saw the foundation and formation of a variety of artistic collaboratives who engaged with technological influences. Among them, the Zero Group, I'll talk about that a little bit later, Le Mouvement, Grave, the New Tendencies, exhibitions and symposia in Zagreb started happening in 1961. And then there also was the Systems Group. And during the same period of time, we also have landmark exhibitions of these art forms, from This Is Tomorrow at the Whitechapel Gallery to the legendary cybernetic Serendipity at ICA in London, a show at the Howard Weiss Gallery in New York, which I'll touch upon later. And then finally, information curated by Keniston McShine at MoMA. And many people would actually argue that this was a breaking point, and that at that point, conceptual art really took over and made it into the mainstream, while digital computational art was largely left behind for a few decades. So when I arrived at the Bermant Collection's home in Santa Ynez at the ranch, I actually met with Victoria, and Victoria pointed me to an issue of Leonardo magazine, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, founded in 1968 by artist and scientist Frank Molina, and then taken to San Francisco later by Roger Molina, his son, after his father's death in 1981. So Leonardo had done in 1974 an issue titled Kinetic Art Theory and Practice. And Victoria saw that an issue of it was in the library, and David Bermant had read this and underlined various passages. And in my residency at the collection, these articles and the words that David Bermant had underlined became kind of a guiding principle for me. So I don't want to read the screen all the time, but in this quote, you'll see, kinetic art will probably take several more decades before large numbers of people really come to it and can appreciate it. So I think this was also an important kind of moment to realize that this was an art form that needed support in many ways. So what I'm going to do in the following is really chart a path through works in the collection. Not all of them, but some of them. And I have created certain kinds of groupings in which you can understand and see these works. I also have to point out, which is kind of obvious and not a criticism, the Bermant collection is eclectic. It's also uneven. It has pieces of various quality, but I think its importance really resides in the fact that it was on the pulse of artistic practice at a certain kind of moment and in a certain kind of area. So kinetics and op art use mechanics or light and optical effects to generate movement, which is very important to this work and to the collection. And in scientific terms, kinetic energy is the energy possessed by a body by virtue of its motion. And kinetic art, which peaked from the middle 60s to the middle 70s, often produced this movement through machines activated by the viewer. So you have a variety of mechanisms and machines that are set up to be activated. Kinetic art overlaps with optical art or op art of the 1960s, in which artists such as Victor Vasarely, Julio Loparc, and Nicola Scheffer used patterns to create optical illusions of movement and vibration and warping. The term actually appeared, the term op art, to the best of my knowledge, first appeared in print in Time magazine in October 1964. But of course, the practice had actually existed before then. So the term was coined a little bit later. And I'll start with this quote. So you can immerse yourself a little bit more into this. But I think what is interesting in this article by Robert Henry, titled Horizontally Oriented Rotating Kinetic Painting, is that he draws attention to the fact that as an aesthetic of kinetic art exists on a very different level than the aesthetic of other art forms due to its temporality. And that contemplation in this work and is in this form of art unfolds in a different way. Typically, a viewer of a painting can perceive at least a totality, a frozen moment, even if there's a lot of detail to experience at any given time. But this is, of course, not true for art that moves, that is interactive. So you have sequences of single moments, and in order to arrive at a certain form of completeness in your mind, you have to remember this work, and remembrance forms a substructure of this work. So the viewing dynamics of this work are very different, and I think this is something that at that time only began to be explored. Obviously, today we have numerous books on interaction and the aesthetics of interaction, but kinetic art really introduced many people to this kind of different form of experience. So I'll start with the work by Getulio Alviani. And the documentation here can't really do the work justice or show you what it is. So it's aluminum on wood, and what you perceive here as this kind of sculpture is really just created through light reflections. If you see this work outside of the light, it is, believe it or not, pretty much flat. Everything that you perceive here as sculptural is just created through reflections of light that exaggerate a form of warping. So while it is a static object, this object really very much works with light to create a three-dimensional form and sculpture in the 1960s. Another example would be Martha Boto's Variation Lumineuse Paris. And this is also a work from 1965. So here we have kind of a light box that is electrified. So you have incandescent lights that are behind these little slits. Obviously, the work unfolds its beauty only when it's darker. And you once again, through very simple means and light and movement, create this kind of structure and very sculptural effect of the work. So this was really in the 60s, a movement of experimentation that was going on. Yet another example from Heinz Mack, also a member of the Zero group, was Light Dynamo #1 from 1966. So here we're looking at aluminum and striated glass, and it's a motorized sculpture. As you can see, it has this very, very vibrant effect. And while these are motorized light sculptures, I think you can easily build a connection to later experiments with software art and lights. If you think of the works of Leo Villarreal or Irvin Radel, for example, who create smaller light sculptures, but then also massive installations, the ideas of movement that inform those are very similar to what is going on here in these sculptures by Mack and others. And there also is a work by Nicolas Scheffer. Let me bring down the volume a little bit because this is really loud if you experience it. So this is one of Scheffer's microton sculptures, and as you can see here, it also consists of these kind of motorized plates and reflectors. And it is a sound sculpture too, so you have different light reflections and this small environment that is created here. Schäfer, who lived 1912 to 1992, was born in Hungary and lived in Paris for most of his life. And he is often referred to as the father of cybernetic art. And in 1956, he created a really landmark piece that Erkki Hutamo has also talked about earlier in this series in the first episode, CISP or CYSP1, so created out of the first letters of cybernetics and spatiodynamic. And this work employed sensors that responded to changes in sound and light intensity. The little clip you saw in the beginning is, I think, the only real moving documentation left of it. So the work consists of 16 polychrome plates that are spinning at different rates. And this was done in collaboration with Philips engineers. Obviously, Namjoon Paik later on would do more manifestations of robots moving in the street, but this was really an early landmark piece. And then yet another light piece by one of the influential people in this field, Otto Piene's Light Ballet #1. So Piene, together with Heinz Mack, was part of the Zero group. Günter Uecker also was a member. And Piene was the first fellow of MIT's Center for Advanced Visual Studies, CAVS, that was founded by Georgi Kepes. And he was the fellow from 1968 to 71, and then served as director of CAVS from 1974 to 1993. Piene also represented Germany at the Venice Biennale in 1967 and 1971. For me, there is a personal connection. I am originally from Düsseldorf, where Piene and the Zero group resided for a while. And at the time, there was also a strong connection to, of course, music, the cultural scene. And Piene and others actually founded a dance club, Cream Cheese, in Düsseldorf. And they also did the art for the environment. And when I snuck in there as a teenager, I was able to see Piene's art live, and I'm sure it really influenced me. You know? So as a backdrop, there was an exhibition devoted to the Zero group, Zero Countdown to Tomorrow, 1950s to 60s, at the Guggenheim Museum in 2015. And coming back to Cream Cheese, artist Luc Dubois, whose work you may be familiar with, actually performed part of the playlist of Cream Cheese for this exhibition. Yeah. Moving on to more optical pieces, and David Vermillion and Karen Moss in episode 2 talked about this in a little bit more depth. So Marcel Duchamp's rotoreliefs, of course, also landmark pieces of op art. We were able to include those in the feedback exhibition. They are cardboard discs printed on both sides with lithographic drawings, originally meant to actually be put onto a turntable. 10 of the images were originally designed for Man Ray and Marc Allegre's 1926 film Anemic Cinema. The version that is in the Bermant collection is from the so-called Milan edition of 1965, which is a reissue of 150 of the 1,000 rotoreliefs from the 1953 New York edition. So once again, really beautiful work. And obviously, if you see this in exhibitions, most of the time you cannot interact with it and exchange the plates here. A different form of movement and light unfolds in the works by Alejandro and Moira Sina. So Alejandro Sina, a Chilean-born, worked for 6 years at MIT's CAPS too, and started collaborating with his wife Moira in 1977. So Spinning Shaft, another virtual volume landmark piece. So you see still at the bottom, it looks just like these weird tubes. And the Sinas were also very good at finding effective ways of working with these neon tubes in the creation of graphic forms. Spinning Shaft was yet another work that we included in the feedback exhibition, and also in the Bermant collection is their work Lasso. Once again, I think it is amazing how much of a visual effect you can create with a very simple means. You see here from the side the 3 spinning tubes, and obviously your perspective and angle on this work will completely change how you experience it. So here more of a bottom view of Lasso. And Erkki Hutamo, in the first episode of the series, in much more depth, got into Thomas Wilfred's Clavelux Jr., the first home Clavelux, an absolutely landmark piece created in 1930 that both anticipates the home television set and seems to create a version of it that is pure visual abstraction and maybe more interesting than what we see on many TVs or TV programs at least. So Wilfred is also credited with creating kind of the first remote control, which you see here in the video. So with Clavelux Jr., you can influence polymorphous spectral streams of color behind a translucent screen by using this remote control. And Wilfred emigrated to the US and developed the art form of color music projections, which he called Lumia. This at the time was really revolutionary. Also in this issue of Leonardo, there is a letter by Wilfred to J. Handel Evans, in which he kind of complains that it's obvious that from sculpture to the architectural, it's only a quick step artistically, and that most architects actually do not honor or appreciate what carefully composed sequences of light can do for architecture. So this combination of light, of the sculptural and of the architectural, obviously is what is of great importance here. And then in this context, continuing the experimentation with the television set is Namjoon Paik's Participation TV. Once again, if you tuned in for episode number 2, David Vermillion talked about this work in a lot more depth and detail. So here we have an interactive video work in which a sound frequency amplifier and microphones are connected to the TV so that you can actually create these graphics by manipulation of the stream. And this work is also closely related, as David Vermillion pointed out, to Paik's Magnet TV, which is in the Whitney's collection and which I recently showed in an exhibition entitled Programmed in 2018. There is a funny backstory to this. So this is a 1982 replica. Apparently, David Bermant had tried to buy work from Paik for quite some time, but for some reason he always refused. And after Paik did a retrospective at the Whitney Museum in 1982, he actually offered to David Bermant that he would create a replica for him, or that his assistant would, if Bermant would pay for invoices related to the Whitney show. And all of the receipts were stuffed into an envelope, and David Bermant asked, like, well, how much is this? Paik didn't answer because he probably didn't even know. how much was in there. It wasn't that much. I actually spent quite some time in the archives at the foundation. Yeah, so I think it was only 3,000. And so that's the price for which David Bermant purchased this. And he also paid an additional 1,000 for a new TV set. And Pike's assistant, Paul Guerin, also a very well-known artist in his own right, created that. And another work in the Bermant collection is Virtually Wise from 1994. I don't want to get too deeply into it because, once again, it has been discussed in episode number 2. So this was created for the exhibition, the Howard Wise Gallery TV as Created Medium, 1969 at the Whitney Museum. So it was kind of staging. The exhibition was curated by John Henhardt and assistant curator Matthew Jakubowski. And then Pike created this work, homage to Howard Wise for the exhibition. And I think it seems to be a particularly pertinent asset of the Bermant collection, given the fact that it includes various works that David Bermant had purchased from Howard Wise, and that the two of them were also friends. And I very vividly remember being able to turn on this work in the evenings. And it's such a privilege to be in a gallery space and have that control over an artwork. So I'm going to move to another section, kinetics and systems, which is another kind of subchapter within the collection. So it includes 2 works by Cork Markowski. And these works use discharges of high voltage to create visual effects. So this sculpture, Waiting for Donna, consists of a wooden box that contains a structure reminiscent of a Jacob's ladder with 3 lamps on each side. And they are lit up through the discharge of voltage. And then another piece in this vein, humorously titled Sparks a Lot, is an electrical system that is made up of these small bent colored tubes that create buzzing sparkles. So they are self-contained systems that really create these choreographies of electricity and maps of conductivity. And it's really quite charming if you experience it. And I think this particular kind of practice really existed only at that time. There's little work today that you see that is really comparable to it. And then there are also 2 pieces by George Rhodes. Once again, very systems-oriented. Rhodes is mostly known for really large-scale sculptures and outdoor sculptures. So these pieces are quite intriguing little systems. They're not meant to be sound sculptures per se, but in some of them, these mixed media motorized steel balls also create interesting sounds. So once again, this kind of allusion to cybernetic systems and a sculpture that constantly changes on the basis of input. And yet another example of that is Blue Shamrock. So here, a different manifestation of a similar idea. I'll let it play just a little bit. But these works are good examples of a kind of systems art that really doesn't exist anymore. Obviously, there's a lot of practice in the area of systems art and feedback loops, but it takes a very different form today in software-based works and others. Another section of the collection is really devoted to kinetics and sound and their intersection. And one of the outstanding pieces is by Takis, Musicale London, And once again, David Vermillion talked about this in a lot more detail. This, I think, is an amazing minimalist sound sculpture that just consists of magnets and needles and a guitar string and electricity. So the kind of experimental soundscape it creates is really done by very minimal means once you turn it on. I think this work absolutely resonates until today and is really intriguing. And I think this definitely is a predecessor for what contemporary artists do today with sound sculptures. And that, just as an example, I want to mention the Swiss artist Simoon's work. I have to bring up the volume because it's a little bit more subtle in this one. So Simoon also works with completely analog sculptures that are being created through these very subtle movements of everyday objects, you know, such as coins or cardboard boxes. So he works with motors. So these are motorized sculptures. I don't know if you can hear the sound. Super subtle. And then much more large scale Simoon's room size installations. But I think you can really see a continuation of the practice of Tages in this kind of work. Another example would be two different series by the German-born artist Peter Vogel. Yeah. So Peter Vogel also visually picks up on systems-based work. This piece resembles kind of an intricate wall-mounted musical notation, and the notes and bars are, of course, made from electrical components and sensors. And there are small speakers attached to it, and you really, as you can see in the video, are playing this piece through the movement of your hand, so it reacts to shadow. Of course, there are many shadow-activated sculptures that you encounter in more contemporary artistic practice. So Vogel has a background in painting and electronic music composition, and also worked for several years in neurophysiological research and development. And I think you can see that influence here too, you know. So the pieces really have their own behaviors and internal logic, and then can be brought into different states depending on the stimulation. A few other pieces in a very different vein. So there are two by the Bachet brothers. So you're looking at musical fountain here that kind of creates a wind chime type of sound through the movement of water. So you can see these little flower heads here basically tipping and creating this soundscape out of the flow of water and the chiming. And there also were outdoor sculptures installed at the ranch and the home of the collection in Santa Ines. So here you have the musical roses. And they are quite beautiful if you experience them on site. Just the kind of interplay of wind in the background and of the chimes of these roses can be very beautiful. Another work I just want to briefly mention in this category is Christian Marclay's wind-up guitar. Once again, David Vermillion and Karen Moss talked a lot more about this. Christian Marclay, of course, known for his music-related pieces, mostly his supercuts, such as the quartet he created, or also the clock, which is not music related. And he also did a few music box mechanisms. So in this case, you have a wind-up guitar, that basically can be operated like a music box. At his exhibition, solo exhibition at the Whitney Museum a while ago, there were several performances related to this. And this type of guitar was one of the instruments that was played in this context. So I'm going to close with one more category, kinetics and cybernetic biology and the human form. So explorations of the mechanical have always kind of entailed questions surrounding the machinic and organic. And there once again is a long history of this that also finds in its expression in the idea of the automaton as a mechanical imitation of the living. And that has fascinated people for centuries. One of the earliest very famous examples was Jacques de Vaucanson's duck, the Canard digérateur, which was created in 1739. The digesting duck was a mechanical duck that appeared to have the ability to eat kernels of grain and digest them. It actually didn't. It was fake. But this is one of the really famous early automata. So there are a few pieces in the collection that explore this interplay between the machinic and organic and anthropomorphic and human. One of them is James C. Wright's houseplants. So here you have mechanical plants that open their mechanical leaves as light sculptures, also based on, once again, on input of the environment. And houseplants was another one of the works that we had included in the feedback exhibition because it really is stimulated or responds to input from the environment. And I want to establish a little bit more context, mention another piece by C. Wright, which is in the collection of the Whitney Museum, The Searcher. So The Searcher is this kind of robotic sculpture and has a head with a searchlight attached to it. It's really anthropomorphic if you see it in action. I don't have a video of it to show you right now. So the searcher with its light is constantly searching around, but is also reacting to light influences from its surrounding. And on the right, you see me holding my phone up to the searcher. So it would react to the flashlight of a phone, for example, when the lighting conditions were right. Really beautiful and intricate sculpture. And apparently, supposedly this had not been out of its crate since it was purchased in 1968 by the Whitney Museum before I took it out for the programmed exhibition, although Jim C. Wright says that he has seen it installed before. The Whitney Museum has no record of that. Yeah. But once again, I think C. Wright created very important works in this vein and area, and early on in his career got a lot of attention for it. I think his first show really sold out immediately. And here we have a more humorous piece that also precedes a lot of practice that would come later. So Dancing Trees actually consists of a box through which you can then control iron powder and magnets. And it's also kind of a music box. The sounds here that you can select are Jimmy Somerville's Small Town Boy, then Pump Up the Jam by Technotronic, which you hear right now. Yeah. So you see this iron powder taking on different shapes and a kind of organic landscape in the form of a garden here through that sound manipulated by electronics. And of course, this really precedes the experimentation with ferrofluid, of which we have seen a lot more in recent years. There are numerous examples, and I'm just mentioning Sachiko Kodama here with Protrude Flow, one of those landmark pieces that ultimately follow in precisely that vein. Yeah. And then also included in the collection is a 1967 piece by Jean Tinguely, once again, recreation from 78. So it's a humorous abstraction that kind of captures both Tinguely's playfulness and his anarchic spirit. Many of you may know him for his self-destructing machines. Tinguely, born in Switzerland in 1925, discovered the work of Dadaist artists and those connected with the Bauhaus when he studied in Basel. And when he moved to Paris in 1951, he became involved with the Nouveau Realist and also Robert Rauschenberg, and later on the Zero Group. Yeah. And one more example is Petit Homme by Fabian Sanchez. Once again, I think this is a nice complement to Tokyo Girl, exploring the human form or kind of alien form in this context. Yeah. Well, there are obvious connections between conceptual art, op art, kinetic art, and today's digital art. And the Bermant collection is really important when it comes to this proto-digital or new media art. I also want to make the point that it would be problematic to neglect the specific historical context of the respective art forms and suggest that the motivation for their creation was the same throughout time. It actually was quite different. Yeah. And finally, I also want to mention or close by making the point again that part of the value of the Bermant collection has really been to bring this work to a larger audience. Once again, feedback would not have been what it was if we hadn't been able to include those works by the Sinas, by Duchamp, by Jim Seawright, to tell the history of digital art. And the work from the Foundation's collection was shown a few more times. So there was, in collaboration with the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, and I'm not sure if I get all the dates right, the exhibition Pulse, People Using Light, Sound, Energy in Soho, which was in 1982. And that one was curated by Tom Finkelpohl. And then there was another exhibition in 1988 at the Aldrich, which was interaction, light, sound, motion. So those works actually also have traveled before, you know, to bring this kind of art form into a different context. And I'll end it here and stop sharing.
And I will return. And Bess will join us, which is wonderful.
I think you're still muted, or I can't hear you, Victoria.
Oh, I can hear you.
Yeah.
I'm not able to hear you.
Can you hear me, Christiane? Can you hear me?
Oops. Doesn't sound like it.
Oh, darn.
I may need to log out and log on again, because in this transition, something happened to my
audio
sound. Very sorry about that. I'll be right
We'll hold it
back. I'll just log out and log in again.
So it's really interesting how there's different perceptions of the same collection, and how it's really nice to see all the different ways that different pieces are talked about. And she was mentioning David Bermant, who will be, you just, Bess, you just talked to him, and I also connected to him. So he will be one of our guests, I believe, in a couple of months, and we're quite excited about that.
The mysteries of Zoom sound is back.
And yeah. So I just wanted to comment, first of all, it's such a wonderful overview, and you wrote the paper as well, which we will make available during your residency. And I've noticed that more and more people are saying, "Oh, this is so important for my classes and for my students," and it's been there for all these decades, you know. So it's really amazing to see how it's grown in importance, and of course, a lot of analog stuff is very cool now. So when the last few groups of students that would come out to see the collection would just be like amazed. But one of the things that I was struck by is how these pieces also change in relation to their context. And I'm curious to get your feedback on this, because it already started, for instance, the Autopine piece that you discussed, that used to be in David Bermant's living room as a coffee table, and a kind of a cool 70s coffee table. Do you remember ever seeing that, Bess?
Yes,
In
absolutely.
that kind of setting?
Absolutely.
And then the James Seawright, I remember when I first came to the collection when I was at UC Santa Barbara, so we're talking about 93 or so. It was outside in the garden. So with the cacti and everything, and that was just phenomenal, right? So there was like a progression of things getting more and more disconnected from his life and how he integrated not only these pieces but also relationship with artists. And I had the kind of honor to be one of the last ones around, but it was very much he collected work of artists that he liked and he wanted to support, and it was so related to that. So I'm just curious how you see the collection moving to yet another location where it will get even more kind of in a museum location. It gets even more categorized. And how do you see the story around it living?
Yeah. I think that's just the natural evolution, of art history, and how art gets historicized and institutionalized. So I was also thinking about Pinot once again. I mentioned going to Cream Cheese as a teenager, and there were those light sculptures around. And then they would be, I don't remember exactly which ones they were or wouldn't be able to recall, but it's pretty much the same work that then decades later appears in the Guggenheim, and suddenly Group Zero, has become something else and not a group of artists who are experimenting and running a dance club, etc. So it's part of that. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, the plans are actually also meant to be seen outside, but of course in kind of a protected environment. From a conservation perspective, that's of course an absolute nightmare, like nothing better to destroy them in the long run. And of course institutions would never do that, they want to preserve work. So I think it's just a natural course, for better or worse, of the historicization of art, that once it finds its place in the canon, it really arrives in a different context. And in the end, I think it's fantastic. I was very happy to hear that the collection was being taken over, because that also guarantees its long-term survival. Yeah. So on the one hand, institutions may always compromise, intent to some extent, and on the other hand, they're also absolutely necessary in guaranteeing the survival.
Is there maybe ways where there could be hybrid situations where a live piece presented in the museum could somehow be streamed online and then discussions happen in relation to contemporary art? Because that's where you really come in a very important way, in my opinion, where you actually have consistently been talking about the lineage of the artists. The media art didn't just come out of the blue and it's something separate, that it's part of this lineage, and it really is. So that conversation, I think, should keep going.
Absolutely. And one thing that I hope will happen, although I'm not sure about it, is that the pandemic may have been kind of a sea change in terms of the hybridity of exhibition and museum experiences. Yeah, at least at the Whitney, I've also been pushing for really sitting down and looking at what should be continued, even if we return to a new kind of normal in this scenario, because you mentioned live streams and different types of interactions with this work. And I think that would be absolutely wonderful and crucial. Another thing that I fully support, although I know it's problematic on an art historical level for various reasons, is the creation of replicas in order to be able to interact with works. Magnet TV, for example, is a major safety hazard. We cannot allow people to interact with a piece because that magnet is so heavy, and if it would ever fall on someone's foot, that's the end of that foot, definitely. So I also thought about creating a replica that would make it with a lightweight fake kind of magnet that would allow for the same interaction, and that would allow people to once again use the piece as it was meant to be used. Right now, it's really only museum staff moving the magnet so that it doesn't burn too much into the screen, of course. So I think we're still experimenting with ways of also showing this type of work in ways that honors their intent. I mean, I'm sure you have been to many exhibitions where it's do not touch and only at certain hours can things be activated, etc., which completely runs counter to what the intent of the artist was.
But replicas is actually a very interesting idea, as long as the real piece is right there standing, as kind of museum piece. I know that there's been some performances from the 60s that have been reenacted with, students and artists, and that was also kind of wonderful. It's different, of course, but you have videos of the initial ones that are, black and white and slowed down, so you don't get the same kind of sense. But it's an interesting way to present this work, I must say, because it's so problematic.
And you bring up another important aspect, which is the performativity of these works, which so often get compared to performance, and ultimately you always re-perform or reenact them in different ways, which raises the same kind of issues, challenges, and also potential that performance art has.
So we have a question from the audience about, I guess, what we were talking about, and I don't know that there's an answer unless Bess, maybe you know how the Butler Museum is planning to exhibit this, turn it on and off. How is this done?
No, I don't know for sure. In our gallery, of course, we turned everything on and off by hand. but I assume at the Butler, it will have some kind of activation process when you walk in front of it, or they're going to have, like Christiane was saying, certain hours when, you know, the senior piece is exhibited and you're able to view it. Right now, they're not doing much because they still have very limited hours. They can't have any openings. They can't have big groups, limited capacity. But they'll get there.
Yeah, we all will.
Yeah. And it's always a give and take. On the one hand, you also don't want to have too much wear and tear on the works through permanently showing them. On the other hand, people should be seeing them. And then museum infrastructure and staff and people who are available, you know, all of this generates costs on the museum and are another issue. We were actually super worried about the searcher and exhibiting it, having no idea how long this piece would last. And we were really surprised how well it held up. In the end, it had some problems, but it wasn't a major deal. So that's another thing you're always afraid of. Yeah.
So Andrew Bermant, who is son of David's, and will eventually give an interview to us, giving us some of the personal stories, which I'm excited about. He mentioned that a lot of this art was placed in shopping centers, which allowed the audiences to get more into it. And in fact, it really helped a lot of artists' careers because they suddenly had a commission for a large public artwork that was kinetic, and then others noticed, etc. So it became part of a public art, which is what David actually always wanted. He was telling me that he really felt it should be active and with people and exhibited as much as possible. So a lot of this work actually is meant for the public to engage with. But tell us what you're doing now. What are you planning? You're always very busy with writing and exhibitions and teaching. What's on your kind of focus right now? Where are you going with your work?
Well, I have been curating the Whitney Museum's Artport website since 2001, so for the past 20 years, and have done during that period more than 100 commissions for the site. And currently we're doing 4 commissions per year. So we just launched 2 of them, one work in the Sunrise Sunset series, which is a 30-second intervention into Whitney.org that happens every morning, every evening at sunrise and sunset New York time, which I think is also a beautiful performative kind of approach to net art, because people stumble upon it by accident, and the work takes over the complete website. And then we also recently launched a co-commission with Liverpool Biennial, which was postponed until March, which is the next biennial will be curated by a machine. So it's an AI that has been trained on data sets from the Whitney and from a Liverpool Biennial and curates in 64 universes manifestations of a biennial. And then I have the next 4 works, in the making for Sunrise, Sunset, and for online. Needless to say, over the past year, net art has been the only art that you could experience in its native environment. We have seen a lot of online exhibitions that often were representations of work that was trapped in the galleries and simulations of gallery environments, but net art, of course, is the only art form that lives in that type of environment. So that work got a lot of attention, and I have been extremely busy with that. And then apart from many writing assignments, I'm also curating the next version of DMODA, the Digital Museum of Digital Art, which is a VR museum. And hopefully we'll be able to launch soon, because the regular venues that we would have applied to and shown up, from Tribeca to others, were of course also postponed last year. And that manifestation of DMODA 4.0, is focused on dislocation appropriately. It was conceptualized before the pandemic, but coincidentally it resonated with works by Ricardo Miranda Zuniga, Tamiko Thiel, Lajeunesse Macmillan, and Vincent Bowinckel.
Great, great. Wow, so you are busy, and it's so, as usual, this is nothing new, I'm not surprised, and you have always been such a great voice for the media art world, and I really appreciate that as a collaborator, friend, and somebody who really appreciates the Foundation's collection. So thank you so much for spending the time with us and giving such a great overview. I already got a few people texting, this is so great, this is recorded, I can use it in my classes. So thank you, Christiane.
Thank you, Christiane.
Many thanks to you. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course, thank you.